It all began on a Friday evening, under the cover of a storm that no one saw coming. The ocean thrashed against the shores of Blackthorn Island, a secluded slice of paradise turned prison. 10 guests had arrived earlier that day, lured by an exclusive invitation from the enigmatic billionaire Victor Harcourt. Victor was known for his secrets he used like weapons. People said he could ruin lives with a single whisper, and now he had assembled 10 individuals who each owed him something, or feared him for something. It was no coincidence that they were all here. When I arrived on the island, disguised as a simple guest, the mood was tense. The sprawling mansion, with its Gothic arches and candlelit halls, felt more like a stage set for a tragedy than a luxurious getaway. Victor greeted us in his typical grand fashion, commanding attention with his booming voice and piercing gaze. He made it clear that he knew more about each of us than we would ever admit. "Enjoy yourselves," he said, his words dripping with menace. "This weekend is all about honesty. Let's see how truthful we can be when the lights go out." By sunset, the storm rolled in, cutting off all communication with the mainland. No phones, no boats, no way out. It was the perfect setting for the kind of nightmare I'd seen too many times before. That night, the storm seemed to seep into the mansion itself, rattling windows and casting shadows in every corner. The guests gathered for dinner in the grand dining hall, a space that felt more like a cathedral than a place for casual meals. Victor sat at the head of the table, playing the role of puppeteer, pulling the strings of tension tighter with every remark. "James, how's that little company of yours holding up?" he asked one guest, his tone dripping with false concern. "Still hiding those lawsuits? Or have the lawyers drained you dry yet?" Another guest, Eleanor, shifted uncomfortably when Victor mentioned her discretion issues. Whatever that meant, it was enough to send her reaching for her glass of wine. And so it went. One by one, he poked and prodded, reminding everyone that their secrets were his to control. After dinner, Victor retreated to his study, locking the door behind him. I watched as the other guests scattered throughout the mansion, some whispering in the hallways, others lingering by the roaring fire in the parlor. By midnight, Victor Harcourt was dead. I was the one who found him, slumped over his desk, his face frozen in an expression of shock. The room was locked from the inside, the key still in the door. There was no sign of a weapon, no blood, no struggle, just Victor and whatever had stopped his heart. It didn't take long for the guests to realize what had happened. As they gathered outside the study, their faces pale and anxious, the storm roared louder, as if nature itself was mocking us. "That door was locked," said Eleanor, her voice shaking. "How could anyone have gotten in?" "Good question." I scanned the room again, taking in the fine details. The overturned glass on the desk, the faint scent of something unfamiliar in the air. This wasn't a random death, it was deliberate. And if there was no way in, then the killer had to be someone already inside. The closed circle was complete. 10 guests, one dead host, and no escape. Whatever secrets had brought us all to this island were about to unravel, one by one. The storm didn't let up, and neither did the tension. By morning, Victor Harcourt's death was all anyone could talk about. Some guests speculated it was natural causes, a heart attack brought on by stress. Others whispered of poison or foul play. I kept my thoughts to myself, quietly watching as the dynamics shifted among the group. They didn't know who I really was. To them, I was just another guest, invited by Victor like the rest of them. But I'd been hired by the man himself. My instructions had been clear: dig into his guests, uncover their weaknesses, and be prepared for anything. What I hadn't expected was to be investigating his murder. By the time breakfast was served, I noticed the alliances forming. Some guests stuck together, whispering nervously in corners. Others sat alone, their gazes darting around the room like they were afraid of being the next victim. That's when I decided to break my cover. "Listen up," I said, standing at the head of the table where Victor had sat just the night before. "My name's Detective Calloway. Victor hired me to investigate you. And until this storm clears, I'm going to find out who killed him." The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. "You're joking," said James, the slick CEO whose confidence had been shaken since Victor's not-so-subtle remarks the night before. "I'm not. And unless you'd like to take the blame for this, I suggest you cooperate. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. First, there was Eleanor. Her poised demeanor from the night before was gone, replaced by raw anxiety. When I pulled her aside for questioning, she admitted Victor had been blackmailing her over an affair with a high-profile politician. "But I didn't kill him," she insisted, her voice barely a whisper. "I swear I didn't." Then there was James. He didn't even try to deny the financial fraud Victor had hinted at during dinner. "I was desperate," he said, pacing back and forth in the library. "Victor found out and threatened to ruin me, but I wouldn't kill him over it. I couldn't." Each guest had a motive, but the most unsettling discovery came from the mansion itself. It was Greta, the quiet woman who kept to herself, who found the hidden passage. She'd stumbled across it in the middle of the night, when she couldn't sleep. "It's behind the bookshelf in the study," she told me, her voice trembling. I thought it was just a draft, but when I pushed the panel, it opened. The passage was narrow and dark, winding through the walls like a secret artery. It led from the study to several other rooms in the mansion, including the guest suites. "You're telling me someone could have used this to get in and out of the study?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "but I don't know who." The discovery sent ripples through the group. If someone had been using the passages, it meant the locked door wasn't as impenetrable as it seemed. But that wasn't all. During my sweep of the mansion's surveillance system, I found footage of an 11th person, a shadowy figure moving through the grounds just after Victor's death. The footage was grainy and distorted, but it was clear that this person wasn't one of the 10 guests. "Who is that?" demanded Theo, the brash attorney who'd spent the morning barking accusations at anyone who'd listen. "I don't know," I said, staring at the screen, "but I intend to find out." As the day wore on, the storm showed no signs of breaking, and neither did the tension. The guests began to unravel, their polished exteriors cracking under the weight of suspicion. Victor had brought them here to confront their secrets, but now those secrets were consuming them. And one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The truth about Victor's death was buried beneath layers of lies, and no one, not even me, was safe until it came to light. By midday, the storm's rage had yet to subside. The guests were like the mansion's windows, shaking under pressure but refusing to shatter, at least not yet. As I moved through the halls, piecing together fragments of truth, it became clear. Everyone had something to hide, and some were better liars than others. I started with Eleanor. She had already confessed to being blackmailed by Victor, but her nervous behavior suggested there was more to her story. I found her in the sitting room, pacing like a trapped animal. "Tell me the rest," I demanded, keeping my tone sharp but calm. "I already told you." "Victor had dirt on me," she snapped, her hands trembling. "What else do you want me to say?" "What about the note?" I asked, watching her reaction carefully. Her face went pale. "What note?" I pulled the crumpled paper from my pocket, the one I'd found in Victor's private study. It was brief but chilling. "You've gone too far this time. You'll regret it." Eleanor's eyes darted toward the fireplace. "That wasn't from me." "Then who?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But if you think I'd kill him over a stupid affair, you're wrong." Maybe she was telling the truth. Or maybe she was better at covering her tracks than I'd thought. Either way, Eleanor wasn't the only one under scrutiny. Theo, the hot-headed attorney, had spent the morning accusing others of the murder. But when I found him in the wine cellar, nursing a half-empty bottle of scotch, his bravado crumbled. "I saw something last night," he slurred, his voice thick with alcohol. "After dinner." "What did you see?" I asked. "There was the shadow in the hallway near Victor's study. Big, tall. Could have been a man or a woman, I don't know. But it wasn't one of us." "Do you swear on that, Theo?" He nodded, but his glazed eyes and unsteady gait told me he wasn't a reliable witness. Still, his mention of the shadow lined up with the security footage. Maybe he'd seen the mysterious 11th person, or maybe he was just too drunk to know the difference. The tension hit a boiling point that afternoon when Greta stumbled upon a hidden room deep within the mansion. It was tucked behind a false wall in the library, and its contents were enough to make anyone's blood run cold. Stacks of files, photographs, financial records, Letters. Victor had kept meticulous records of every guest's darkest secrets. James's fraudulent business deals, Eleanor's affair, Greta's gambling debts, even Theo's suspected involvement in a high-profile embezzlement case. "This is insane," muttered Greta, leafing through the files with trembling hands. But the most damning piece of evidence was a letter addressed to Victor himself. "You won't get away with this. I won't let you ruin my life." The handwriting was jagged and frantic, and no one could agree on whose it was. "That could be from anyone," Theo muttered, his voice cracking. "He was blackmailing all of us." "That's convenient," I said, "but it doesn't prove anything yet." By evening, the atmosphere was thick with paranoia. The guests moved in tight groups, unwilling to be left alone. Whispers filled the mansion's vast hallways, accusations thrown like daggers. "He was blackmailing Greta the most," one voice hissed. "No, it's James. He's the only one who had the money to hire someone to do it." The alliances that had formed earlier began to crumble, replaced by bitter rivalries and suspicion. In the midst of the chaos, I revisited the hidden passage behind the study. Something about it gnawed at me. Its placement, its purpose. And that's when I noticed it. Footprints, faint but distinct, leading from the passage's entrance toward the study. They were smudged, as if someone had tried to wipe them away, but the storm's dampness had preserved just enough to follow. By the time I emerged from the passage, the mansion had grown eerily quiet. The guests were scattered, their nervous energy dissipating into silence. And that's when the scream pierced the air. I sprinted toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. It came from the east wing, where the guest rooms were located. When I reached the scene, I found James standing frozen in the hallway, his face ashen. Behind him, a shattered window let in the howling wind and rain. "I saw them," he stammered. "The 11th person. They were trying to escape." "Which way did they go?" I barked. He pointed toward the cliffside, where the mansion overlooked the raging sea. Grabbing a flashlight, I ran out into the storm. The footprints on the wet grass confirmed James's story, but as I followed them, a chilling realization struck me. The 11th person wasn't just a shadow. They were real, and they had been right under our noses the entire time. The storm raged on as I followed the trail of footprints across the sodden ground, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The cliffside loomed ahead, its jagged edges illuminated briefly by flashes of lightning. The footprints ended abruptly at the edge, leaving no sign of where the 11th person had gone. Had they jumped? Or was this another trick, another layer to the deception? I returned to the mansion, soaked and empty-handed, to find the guests waiting in the grand hall. Their faces were pale, their nerves frayed to breaking point. "Well?" demanded Theo, his voice sharp. "Did you catch them?" "No," I replied, shaking the rain from my coat. "But they're real, and they've been moving through this mansion like a ghost." James, still trembling from his earlier encounter, muttered, "I told you. I saw them. I wasn't imagining it." But before I could press him further, a revelation shifted the entire case. Greta, the quietest of the group, stood up, clutching a journal she'd found in the hidden room. Her hands shook as she flipped through the pages. This is Victor's," she said, her voice barely audible. The journal was filled with cryptic notes, observations about the guests, and plans for this very weekend. But the most shocking entry was dated just days before his death. "They'll all suspect each other when it happens. I'll be safe as long as no one finds out the truth." "What truth?" Eleanor asked, her voice rising in panic. "What the hell does that mean?" I scanned the page again, my mind racing. Victor had planned for chaos, that much was clear. But if this was some elaborate scheme, it had gone far beyond his control. Then came the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. While examining the hidden room, I noticed something odd about the surveillance equipment. A small but deliberate cut in one of the cables. A tampering so subtle it could have easily been missed. Someone had doctored the footage, ensuring that the 11th person's face remained obscured. Who had access to the security system? I demanded, turning to the group. Silence. Then, finally, James spoke up. "Victor managed all of it himself. He didn't trust anyone else with it." "That's not entirely true," Greta interjected. Victor's assistant had access. They managed everything when he wasn't around. Victor's assistant, the 11th person, the shadow. It all clicked into place when I examined the room one last time. On the desk, among Victor's neatly arranged papers, was an innocuous object, a fountain pen. But it wasn't just any pen. Victor's cause of death had puzzled me from the start. No weapon, no struggle, just an expression of shock frozen on his face. And now I realized why. The pen had been modified to deliver a lethal dose of poison, a rare toxin, one that could kill within seconds of entering the bloodstream. Victor had been holding it when he died. Whether as a tool, a weapon, or a mistake, I couldn't yet say. But the pen had traces of fingerprints. Everyone stays in this room, I ordered. No exceptions. I handed the pen to Theo, who reluctantly admitted he had some forensic training from his legal days. Within moments, he confirmed the truth. The prints didn't belong to any of the 10 guests. They belonged to Victor himself. A murmur rippled through the group, a mix of confusion and disbelief. That doesn't make sense, Eleanor said. Why would Victor poison himself? That's what I intend to find out, I replied, my voice firm. The storm had exposed more than just the hidden passage's entrance. A set of muddy footprints led from the passage straight into the study. But these weren't the 11th persons. They were too small. They belonged to one of the guests. And now, with the storm finally beginning to clear, it was time to confront the truth. I want everyone in the dining hall, I said, stepping into the room where Victor had delivered his chilling dinner remarks the night before his death. No more games. This ends tonight. The guests filed in one by one, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and exhaustion. The evidence had finally come together, and the pieces of the puzzle painted a picture far darker than any of them had imagined. The killer was about to be unmasked. The dining hall was suffocatingly silent. 10 guests sat at the table, their faces pale and taut with dread. The storm outside had quieted to a steady drizzle, but inside, the tension crackled like lightning. I stood at the head of the table, where Victor Harcourt had presided just the night before. In front of me was the evidence: the poisoned fountain pen, Victor's journal, and the tampered security footage. This ends now, I said, letting the words hang in the air. Victor Harcourt's death wasn't just a murder, it was a trap. The room erupted in gasps and whispers, but I held up a hand to silence them. Victor staged his own murder, I continued, pacing the length of the table. He wanted all of you here for one reason: revenge. Each of you had something to lose, a secret Victor could exploit, and he intended to use those secrets to ruin you. Greta's voice broke through the silence. But why? Why go to such lengths? Because Victor was desperate. His empire was crumbling. He'd burned too many bridges, made too many enemies. But if he could fake his own death and pin the blame on one of you, he stood to gain millions in insurance money and the satisfaction of seeing you all destroy each other in the process. The revelation hit them like a tidal wave. James sank into his chair, his hand trembling as he gripped the edge of the table. Eleanor stared at the journal, her eyes wide with disbelief. But Victor is dead, Theo said, his voice laced with skepticism. If this was a setup, how do you explain that? I picked up the fountain pen, turning it over in my hand. This is the key, I said. The pen was designed to deliver a lethal dose of a rare toxin. Victor intended to use it to fake his death. He would have taken an antidote immediately after administering the poison to himself. But something went wrong, I continued. Victor's plan backfired. He didn't account for the strain on his heart, and he suffered a fatal heart attack before he could take the antidote. The room fell into stunned silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone like a stone. "And the 11th person?" asked Greta, her voice trembling. "That was Victor's personal assistant," I replied. "The person who helped him orchestrate this entire scheme. They were supposed to cover his tracks, plant evidence, and ensure the plan went smoothly. But when they discovered Victor's body, they panicked and fled." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of Victor's twisted plot sinking in. "It was never about you," I said, addressing the group. "Victor didn't care about your secrets, only how he could use them to manipulate you. He wanted chaos, suspicion, and fear. And for a while, he got exactly what he wanted. Eleanor broke the silence, her voice heavy with anger. So we were just pawns in his sick game. Yes, I said, but now you know the truth, and it's up to you what you do with it. As the storm finally broke, the guests began to leave the island, one by one, their lives forever changed by what had transpired. The secrets they had fought so hard to protect were now scars they would carry with them. I stood alone in the mansion's grand hall, staring at the remnants of Victor's world. His need for control, for power, had ultimately destroyed him. In the end, the only question that lingered was the one Victor had never answered. Was it worth it? As I stepped out into the clearing dawn, the mansion behind me, I couldn't help but reflect on the lengths people go to for revenge, for power, for survival, and how, sometimes, the greatest enemy lies within.